But Schindler was increasing his workforce again, and my father asked him to add my mother and me to the list. And he did that too. Something about, maybe because my father was his first Jew that Schindler hired, or maybe because he hired him because of his craft, not because he bribed him. You understand that Schindler was not too shy about taking bribes and stuff like that. He just, when my father asked him to add my mother and me to the list, he did. So a few days, with my good fortune, a few days before we were supposed to be escorted out of this plush place from the end of the earth to Schindler's company, my name was crossed off the list. I found out that I was not going to go. You know, you have to be unlucky before you get, you're lucky. And so again, my mother was already lined up in front of the gate to be escorted out of this Ploshov camp or to Schindler's company. And I was in my brush factory. They had restarted the brush factory again in the camp, and I slipped away from my job and went to see my mother off. I was still a child. I was a boy, just my mother's leaving. And as luck would have it, nobody stopped me. Normally somebody would stop me and say, "Where are you going?" and start beating me up, But nobody did. It just kept going, and pretty soon I was there, and I was close enough to actually hear them talk, and they saw me, and I waved, and nobody said anything. I got closer, and I can't even tell you the last few steps that I took. I found myself in front of this Nazi officer who was in charge of escorting this group to Schindler's company. Big guy. Big. Maybe it wasn't quite as big, but when I looked straight at him, I only could see his belt buckle. And so, I was little, I could speak all kinds of languages, because this was kind of easy for me. And so I told him, I spoke German. I told him my name. And I told him that my name was on the list, and somebody crossed it out. And then I proceeded to tell this murderer that, about my family, like I said, if I were talking to a real human being, and I told him about my mother is on the list, and she's in this group. And then I said that my father and my brother are already there, and even then I thought, that is a stupid thing to say. I shouldn't have said that. Something happened though. He looked at his assistant, asked for the list, he looked at the list, and he saw my name there. He looked at me, he looked at the list, and just grunted. Nazis never talked to us in complete sentences. After all, we were non-human. You don't talk to your dog in a complete sentence. They didn't talk to us. They always yelled, "Raus, schnell, los." Sometimes verfluchte Jude, that's 2 words combined. And so he just went like that, and so I jumped into this group, and it seemed like a long time before we started to move, but it probably wasn't. And this is how I made it to Schindler's list, onto Schindler's company. When I got there, I was shown we were taken to the factory and shown some work that we could do, and those of us who could perform, then would end up doing this work. So we tried out on different things, and there were a few people lined up, and I was next, and when it came to me, I could do whatever they were showing me to do, because I used to see my father work with this machine, so I could do something. Anyway, so I got to work on this machine for 12-hour shifts. Those of you who know something about machinery, it's a lathe, a metal lathe. And I was a lathe operator on 12-hour shifts in Schindler's company for the rest of the time. But I used to stand on a box upside down because I couldn't reach the controls very well. So I used to stand on a box about 8 inches high and, to operate the machine. And Schindler had a habit of coming down to the factory after he entertained people in his office there for hours, and he used to wee hours in the morning where after everybody left, he would come down all by himself. You could tell Schindler's in the factory without even looking. He was always all, dressed up to tea, and he was smoking these aromatic cigarettes. You could tell even if you weren't looking, Schindler must be around here somewhere, And so he would come around, and then he'd stop and talk to people. Every now and then he'd stop and talk to people, ask them something. And this is how you find out the difference between a Nazi who accepted the Nazi ideology, that some people are less than human, and somebody like Schindler, who never accepted this ideology. When he stopped and talked to us, he looked us right in the eye, he waited, spoke in complete sentences, and then waited for an answer. Occasionally he'd stop and talk to me. He really didn't have too much to say to somebody my age, I mean, he's a busy man doing all kinds of things. But he'd stop and say, ask me how I was doing and how many pieces I've made. He really didn't want to know all of that. He just wanted to make a little human contact with this kid who's working, pretending to be an adult. And sometimes after those visits, I would go to get my ration of food the next day, and I would find out that Schindler left word that I should receive 2 rations. Now you have to think about that a little bit. This is not just that easy. He'd been partying all night, and he saw me in wee hours of the morning, like 4 maybe, and then he was able to find the guy who handed out the rations and tell him that to give me 2 rations. He knew me, he knew my brother behind that worked on another machine like mine behind me, and he knew my father, stopped and talked to my father occasionally. He even would sometimes would leave a half a pack of cigarettes on his workbench, sort of accidentally on purpose. He was a kind of person that you could tell, even though you weren't certain that he'd be able to arrange it so you could survive the war, but you could tell that he is a different kind of human being. If I brought Schindler, or somebody like Schindler, who was not a Nazi, and a real true Nazi like the one I was talking to, you would know the difference. There's nothing behind the Nazi's eyes, If you looked at Schindler, there'd be a little sparkle, a little, you would recognize it immediately. You would know it even if I didn't tell you who it was. Speaking of that, during this whole period of time during these terrible events, we tried to keep our humanity. We would tell jokes. We sang songs. They were dark humor, but it was always something. And people recited poetry, and there were all kinds of educated people, and people who had talent, sang songs. So, we tried to keep our humanity. They tried to take it away from us. They could kill us, but they can't take the humanity away.